Welcome! I'm so glad you're here. I'm Gila Ross, parenting educator and coach, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Confident Parent podcast, bringing you the content you need to bring more ease, joy and love into your parenting so that you can show up as the parent you want to be to your children. Last session, we spoke about, we focused really on tantrums where the child is overwhelmed. You know, they've got into a situation where they're overhungry, their emotions are run high, they're overtired, whatever it is. This week, we want to focus on tantrums where the child wants to be in control, right? Either you've asked the child to do something and they point blank refuse. Very important as parents that we teach our children that when we say something, they listen to us, you know. And I think a common example of a tantrum like this is when you ask your child to do something. You ask your child to take their dinner plate into the kitchen, and they point blank refuse and say, no, I'm not going to do it. Or they throw a tantrum and they say, you always make me work like a slave, or it's way too heavy. There's no way I can carry this empty plate of food, you know, after I've been lugging 3 tons of mud around the garden or whatever, right? So number one, what is the message that we want to be communicating to our children? Any ideas of what the message that we want to communicate to our children is in general? And it doesn't have to be the message that we are literally going to communicate with our words, but by our actions and our reaction, what is the message that we want to communicate to our children?
Like calm down and control yourself?
Yes, I would say that's part of the message.
I'd also want them to know that if you've asked them to do something, they need to do it. Like, it's a non-negotiable, so they can have that tantrum, but at the end of the day, they need to do the thing that you want them to do. And
yep.
If there's an underlying reason, if they're tired and you've asked them to do something, I think it's a different story. But in this specific scenario, I think I'd hate using this example, but they need to know you're boss. Like, they need to know you're the boss.
Absolutely, yeah. You're right. And that's why I clarified that we're specifically talking here about types of tantrums where the kid is not overwhelmed, right? The kid is just trying to assert their control. And I think these tantrums happen. And I would say, Amy and Nikki, you're so right. We want to communicate. I would just add one thing. We want to communicate to our children, I love you. And I am going to help you listen to me, right? I love you. And you have to listen, and you have. So how are we going to communicate this to us? So again, in some ways, it's similar to the other tantrum. There's a lot of planning ahead if possible, right? The more we know our kids, the more we know what's gonna trigger them, right? Some children are just so compliant, right? You ask them to do something and they say, yes, we'll do it. And then they grow a little bit older and they get more normal and they're like, no, I could say no, and I can push buttons and I can, try and assert my own independence, right? So when we meet children, number one, we realize we're normal. We're raising human beings, not robots. Okay. Now, the language also matters. Language is usually important. For example, I'll give you an example. Think about this, right? If your child is making the most ridiculous noise, and you tell them, there's no need for that noise, just stop it right now. How does that make you feel? As opposed to, I can see that you're having so much fun. Can you take that noise outside, right? The way we act, we say things, we have to be conscious of the emotions we're going to bring up in our children. If we say, we spoke about the idea, I think a few sessions back, about we try to empower our children as opposed to impose, right? Instead of saying, I want you to clean up the table now, is, let's see if you can get 10 items of 10 toys back into the toy box by the time I count to 20, right? That's a challenge that the child might respond to. So it's something that, again, it's the planning ahead and thinking, how can can I say this in a way that is not going to get that child's back up so that they're going to say no. Now, obviously, even with that planning ahead, there are going to be occasions where we say things and the child just says no, or the child throws a tantrum because they want it on their terms. So at that point, what we do, we're trying to communicate that I love you and you have to listen. I love you, and the other parents, you are the child. There is a hierarchy in this family. So what we do is, number one, if the child is open to it, we can give them love and reassurance, right? We can say, I could see you're upset. If they want a hug, give them a hug. But then we have to put down the boundaries, right? If the child is kicking and screaming, right, you say, there is no kicking, right? You can express your frustration, but it has to be in an acceptable manner. And obviously, as the younger the child is, the more simplistic the level, the wording has to be, right? You know, with an older child, if your child is 7 or 8, you can explain to them, you could say, and this, again, during the moment of the tantrum is not the best time to, it's not a teachable moment, right? It's getting through it. But afterwards, or before you teach your child, you say to them, you can express your frustration, but it has to be an acceptable manner. You could say, I don't want to do that. Can I do another job? Or, Mommy, I did this earlier. Do I have to do this? Right? But to throw your feet down and say, absolutely not, that's not acceptable. Or you're the worst mom or dad ever for asking me to take my plate and and I hate you, or whatever else they're going to say. That's not an acceptable way of expressing your frustration. And at that point, if your child, if you have validated your child, if you say, I could see you really don't want to do this, but I've told you to do it, you have to do it, and the child is still kicking off and still having a tantrum, you may have to give them a reset. Okay, so just a reminder, what a reset looks like at that point is it's something that we've already introduced to the children ahead of time, and you just say reset or whatever word you want to choose, and as long as you're in a safe place, you turn away from the child and you say, either that in the moment, if you haven't already said it, or if the child doesn't know already, that as soon as you calm down, the reset will be over, right? And then we're going to be creative, right? Because sometimes the child will take a breather within the tantrum, and that's a good opportunity to say, wow, I can see that you're controlling yourself, you're pulling yourself together, thank you for doing it. Now let's finish off the job, and then hopefully the tantrum is over. If the child continues tantruming, you may have to give them an additional reset. If they're still tantruming and you feel like they're destroying things, right? You can't just leave them, right? Sometimes the best option is just to leave them, right? Go make yourself a coffee or whatever else you want to put in your glass and sit down while they tantrum. If they're in a safe place and go do that while they finish off their tantrum. But if you feel like they're destroying things or they're not safe, then you could give them of a sanction, right? In which case you would say to them, if this doesn't end, then whatever your sanction is, right? I'm going to give you an extra job in the house to help out the family, or I'm going to take this away for a certain amount of time, right? Whatever the sanction is. And then as soon as possible, right? Whenever we see the window of them calming down, we try as quickly as possible to give them that creative recognition, to say to them, I see that you're calming down. I see that you're composing yourself. I see that, you've got that self-control, or however else we want to do it. Thank you. And then it's over, right? As soon as it's over, it's over. We don't lecture them or talk to them or whatever. It's over. At a later date, when the child is calm, if you feel it's important, at a later time when the child is calm, we could discuss it with them, right? We could say to them, I see that you were asked to do something and you really didn't want to do that. How do you think you could communicate that in an acceptable manner, and brainstorm with them ways that they can actually express their frustration in an acceptable manner? So just to quickly sum up, we spoke about tantrums when the child is trying to take control of a situation. You ask them to do something, they point blank refuse. They want something, they're not accepting your no. They're not in a place where they're overwhelmed. They are trying to take control. what we're trying to do is beforehand to plan ahead, try and remove those triggers, to as much as possible distract them or whatever, to use our language so that we try and minimize them getting into their backup and their defiance. If they're open to it, we can give love, we can validate them. If we need to, we give a reset where we turn away from the child until the child calms down. And as soon as possible that we see the child is calming down, we move back in and we try and give them creative recognition for pulling themselves together, give them another opportunity to complete whatever it is that they had to do, and try and move them on to success. And if we feel it's necessary at a later time when they're calm, when you've had nice time together, you can in a quiet moment brainstorm with them better ways of dealing with their frustration. All right. And overall, what we are trying to communicate with this is we love them. And yes, they do have to understand the hierarchy in the home. And it is, in the end of the day, the best interest for them to understand that they have to accept the boundaries and listen to us as parents. Thank you, everyone.
By the way, this actually works. Gita is exceptionally good at this. And a lot of practice. It does work. I'm telling you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your questions for future episodes. And please take a moment, think about someone else who might benefit from this and forward it on to them. If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully, for more insights on how to bring meaning, joy, love into your life based on timeless Jewish wisdom. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out.